What the fuck is taking so long? They're arresting Putin. That's what's taking so long. Oh. Movements.
Along with Steve Witkoff as well. The envoy who sort of set the table for this meeting has been traveling really around the world to both Israel and trying to also Russia, somewhat freelancing in the role. It kind of goes wherever the president wants to send him. And the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, his role transforming now at the White House as a national security advisor. These were the two men that were part of the U.S. bilateral meeting, the initial meeting that was supposed to take place, that we believe did take place. We saw sort of the pool spray, if you will. That's when they gave us the first images of those people sitting together. It's unclear what meetings happened after that. We believe that the lunch was scrapped on the schedule because of the timing of all this. It was kind of fascinating. And Vladimir Zelensky has evolved over the years. It looks like this is about to start. We see President Trump and Vladimir Putin. Let's listen in.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, our negotiations have been held in a constructive atmosphere of mutual respect. We have very thorough negotiations that were quite useful. I would like to thank once again my American counterpart for the proposal to travel out here to Alaska. It only makes sense that we've met here because our countries, though separated by the oceans, are close neighbors. So when we've met, when I came out of the plane and I've said, "Good afternoon, dear neighbor. Very good to see you. In good health and to see you alive." I think that is very neighborly.
Oh my God, why does Trump look so happy? I feel like he loves him.
Kind words that we can say to each other. We're separated by the Strait of Bering, though there are 2 islands only between the Russian island and the U.S. island. They're only 4 kilometers apart. We're close neighbors, and it's a fact. It's also important that Alaska has to do with our common heritage, common history between Russia and the U.S., and many positive events have to do with that territory. Still, there is tremendous cultural heritage back from the Russian America. For example, Orthodox churches and a lot of more than 700 geographical names of Russian origin. During the Second World War, it was here in Alaska that was the origin of the legendary bridge for the supply of military aircraft.
Last time he talked about the relevance of a country, he invaded it, okay? I'm just saying.
Dangerous and treacherous route over the vast
last time he talked about the historical relevance of a country,
however,
of sovereign
the pilots
territory,
of both countries did everything to pursue the victory. They risked their lives and they gave it all for the common victory. It was just in the city of Russia, and there is a memorial there dedicated to the Russian and the U.S. pilots. And there are 2 flags, the U.S. flag and the Russian flag. And I know that here as well, there is such a memorial. There is a military burial place several kilometers away from here. The Soviet pilots are buried there who died during that dangerous mission. We're thankful to the citizens and the government of the U.S. for carefully taking care of their memory. I think that's very worthy and noble. We'll always remember other historical examples when our countries defeated common enemies together in the spirit of battle camaraderie and allyship that supported each other and facilitated each other. I'm sure that this heritage will help us rebuild and be beneficial and
a joint invasion of Ukraine.
This new stage, even during the hardest conditions.
He's going to say now the real Nazis are Ukraine.
There have been no summits between Russia and the U.S. for 4 years, and that's a long time. This time was very hard for bilateral relations, and let's be frank, they have fallen to the lowest point since the Cold War. I think that's not benefiting our countries and the world as a whole. It is apparent that sooner or later we had to amend the situation to move on from the confrontation to dialogue. And in this case, a personal meeting between the heads of state has been long overdue. Naturally, under the condition of serious and painstaking work, and this work has been done in general. Me and President Trump have very good direct contact. We've spoken multiple times. We spoke frankly on the phone, and special envoy of the president, Mr. Witkoff, traveled out to Russia several times. Our advisors and heads of foreign ministries kept in touch all the time, and you know fully well that one of the central issues was the situation around Ukraine. We see the strive of the administration and President Trump personally to help facilitate the resolution of the Ukrainian conflict. And his strive to get to the crux of the matter, to understand this history, is precious. As I've said, the situation in Ukraine with respect to our security. Moreover, we've always considered the Ukrainian nation, and I've said it multiple times, a brotherly nation. However strange it may sound in these conditions, we have the same roots, and everything everything that's happening is a tragedy for us and terrible wound. Therefore, the country is sincerely interested in putting an end to it. At the same time, we're convinced that in order to make the settlement lasting and long-term, we need to eliminate all the primary roots, the primary causes of that conflict. And we've said it multiple times, to consider all legitimate concerns of Russia and to reinstate a just balance of security in Europe and in the world on the whole. And I agree with President Trump, as he has said today, that naturally the security of Ukraine should be ensured as well. Naturally, we are prepared to work on that. I would like to hope that the agreement that we've reached together will help us bring closer that goal and will pave the path towards peace in Ukraine. We expect that Kiev and European capitals will perceive that constructively and that they won't throw a wrench in the works. They will not make any attempts to use some backroom dealings to conduct provocations to torpedo the nascent progress. Incidentally, when the new administration came to power, bilateral trade started to grow. It's still very symbolic. Still, we have a growth of 20%. As I've said, we have a lot of dimensions for joint work. It is clear that the U.S. and Russian investment and business cooperation has tremendous potential. Russia and the U.S. can offer each other so much in trade, digital, high-tech, and in space exploration. We see that Arctic cooperation is also very possible, and our international context, for example, between the Far East of Russia and the West Coast of the U.S. Overall, it's very important for our countries to turn the page, to go back to cooperation. It is symbolic that not far away from here, at the border between the U.S., there is a so-called international date line. I think you can step over, literally, from yesterday into tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
And I hope succeed in that, in political sphere. I would like to thank President Trump for our joint work, for the well-wishing and trustworthy tone of our conversation. It's important that both sides are result-oriented, and we see that the President of the U.S. has a very clear idea of what he would like to achieve. He sincerely cares about prosperity of his nation. Still, he understands that Russia has its own national interests. I expect that today's agreements will be the starting point, not only for the solution of the Ukrainian issue, but also will help us bring back business-like and pragmatic relations between Russia and the U.S. And in the end, I would like to add one more thing. I'd like to remind you that in 2022, during the last contact with the previous administration, I tried to convince my previous American colleague the situation should not be brought to the point of no return when it would come to hostilities. And I said it quite directly back then that it's a big mistake. Today, when President Trump saying that if he was the president back then, there will be no war. And I'm quite sure that it would indeed be so. I can confirm that. I think that overall, me and President Trump have built a very good business-like and trustworthy contact. And I have every reason to believe that moving down this path, we can come, and the sooner the better, to the end of the conflict in Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. That was very profound. And I will say that I believe we had a very productive meeting. There were many, many points that we agreed on. Most of them, I would say, a couple of big ones that we haven't quite gotten there, but we've made some headway. So there's no deal until there's a deal. I will call up NATO in a little while. I will call up the various people that I think are appropriate, and I'll, of course, call up President Zelensky and tell him about today's meeting. It's ultimately up to them. They're going to have to agree with what Marco and Steve and some of the great people from the Trump administration who've come here, Scott and John Ratcliffe. Thank you very much. But we have some of our really great leaders. They've been doing a phenomenal job. We also have some tremendous Russian business representatives here. And I think, everybody wants to deal with us. We've become the hottest country anywhere in the world in a very short period of time. And we look forward to that. We look forward to dealing. We're going to try and get this over with. We really made some great progress today. I've always had a fantastic relationship with President Putin, with Vladimir. We had many tough meetings, good meetings. We were interfered with by the Russia hoax. It made it a little bit tougher to deal with, but he understood it. I think he's probably seen things like that during the course of his career. He's seen it all, but we had to put up with the Russia hoax. He knew it was a hoax, and I knew it was a hoax, but what was done was very criminal. But it made it harder for us to deal as a country in terms of the business and all of the things that we'd like to have dealt with. But we'll have a good chance when this is over. So just to put it very, I'm going to start making a few phone calls and tell them what happened. But we had an extremely productive meeting, and many points were agreed to. There are just a very few that are left. Some are not that significant. One is probably the most significant, but we have a very good chance of getting there. We didn't get there, but we have a very good chance of getting there. I would like to thank President Putin and his entire team, whose faces, who I know in many cases, other than that, whose faces I get to see all the time in the newspapers. You're almost as famous as the boss, but especially this one right over here. But we had some good meetings over the years, right? Good productive meetings over the years. And we hope to have that in the future. But let's do the most productive one right now. We're going to stop really 5, 6, 7,000, thousands of people a week from being killed. And President Putin wants to see that as much as I do. So, again, Mr. President, I'd like to thank you very much. And we'll speak to you very soon and probably see you again very soon. Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I could see it possibly happening. Thank you very much, Vladimir. And thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So nothing. It was even worse than I thought. It was just him glazing Putin.
So we have just been watching this news conference between President Trump and Vladimir Putin, and it is strikingly unclear what, if anything, was accomplished here. The president saying there is no deal until there is a deal, saying they have disagreed on some major points, but they've agreed on other points, that he's going to call NATO now. He's going to call President Zelensky. But this is quite incredible. Under the banner of pursuing peace here in Alaska on U.S. soil, Vladimir Putin's first trip to the U.S. in nearly a decade, it is unclear what they've accomplished. It is unclear what they've agreed on. And more importantly, it is unclear what this means for the people of Ukraine that are currently fighting a war against Russia that has invaded their territory. Peter Alexander was in that room there. Peter, you know, they were dropping sort of some nuggets here and there, but it's really unclear what they've agreed upon. About a cooperation with the U.S. possibly in aid, in space, and high tech.
What is happening? A lot of platitudes were discussed, nothing concrete. What is your takeaway from what we just heard there?
Hey, Will, can you hear me?
Well, first of all, this is one of the very few times, Tom, I think we can say that the President of the United States had few words. How many times have we seen him where he took questions for hours and hours today, not taking a single question from reporters in the room, leaving unanswered a series of questions like, is there any ceasefire that was agreed to? It appears clear that there was not, at least from him saying there's no deal until there is a deal. He said there has been significant, as he described it, progress that's been made. A couple things are striking here. You'll remember the president earlier today, as he was departing Washington aboard Air Force One, said he was not going to be happy if there was no ceasefire reached. He would be willing to walk away from this without a news conference and fly back home. Obviously, he stuck around, but it doesn't appear that he came away with what he was hoping to come away with. What is still up in the air is what this means for Ukraine. I was struck by what we heard from Vladimir Putin, who in effect said that they had a series of conversations, and among those things that need to be addressed are the origins of this war, in effect blaming Ukraine for this war. I think most would agree, all should agree, that this was a war started by Russia, but it's unclear if Donald Trump supports the idea of an independent sovereign Ukraine next door to Russia, why he would trust Vladimir Putin to stop the killing of soldiers and civilians alike. There are so many questions that remain unanswered. It's not just the future of Ukraine that remains up in the air, but ultimately its impact throughout that region. We're going to be working our sources right now. We are told that the reporters who were traveling aboard Air Force One have already been rushed out of the room gathering.
Bro, this is the most bitch-made thing I've ever seen. The situation is more dire.
Honestly, Tom, we've really never seen anything like
America is like, dude, Vladimir Putin literally came to the United States of America, took his cock out, and said, suck it. And Trump gave him a blowjob, only to turn around and get nothing out of this equation at all beyond glazing Putin. What the fuck? I mean, so far, that's what it looks like to me.
literally zero details. And the president himself, though, at one point saying that thousands of lives will be saved if this deal is accomplished. But again, we have no idea what's going to happen. It sounds like he's going to go to NATO and go into I guess, the Ukrainian president and maybe talk about the terms of the deal and come back. But it's unclear. I do want to bring in now moderator of Meet the Press, Kristen Welker. Kristen, you've interviewed President Trump several times. You've covered these bilateral meetings just like Peter. You've been in the room. Look, if we start to read what's happened so far, a lot of the meeting was scrapped. It was shorter than we thought it was going to be. There's a news conference. No questions are taken. And now both leaders are on their way back to, Putin's back to Russia, President Trump back to D.C. What can we read from all this?
This is an extraordinary turn of events, Tom. Peter laid it out well. The fact that this feels rushed, the fact that we just heard from both leaders, and yet it's very cloudy in terms of what exactly was discussed, what was accomplished. They offered few, if any, specifics, Tom, and they took no questions. This is a president who relishes taking questions. The Russian president relishes taking questions when he holds his annual news conference that can last for hours on end. So the fact that this was so clipped, the fact that you heard from a somewhat muted President Trump underscores that he is not walking away from the ceasefire with a ceasefire agreement that he was hoping for. Remember, those were the terms that he laid out at the beginning of this day. That was how he was defining victory: an immediate ceasefire, an unconditional ceasefire. We did not hear the term ceasefire uttered. We didn't hear any end to the fighting talked about. And that really was the goal to this meeting, and to get a second meeting. Will there be another meeting with President Zelensky? I'm starting to get some reaction, Tom. A European source telling me this was a big nothing burger. A Republican ally of President Trump saying it's a very good start, but not providing any details. And
okay, we got to watch Fox. We got to see the spin.
What happened here? So I think the broad reaction.
Putin come out and address
Trump said he could go to Moscow,
first.
brother.
And
What
we
are you
on
talking about?
U.S. soil here, and that left the media scrambling to get their headsets in. Usually, it is the the leader of the country, the host country of a summit, that speaks first and addresses the room in their language. But Putin started right off in Russian, and we all had to get our headsets on and listen to him rattle off this diatribe about the history of the U.S.-Russia relationship, making some allusions to something that
Fox
many
News
details,
is
but
you hear
also without knowing the full background of it, there was something that he said that was a little bit alarming, I thought, that seemed like some of the things that he has done in the past, setting up false flags and that kind of thing, saying that we hope that Ukraine doesn't do anything to sabotage the progress that we made today, knowing full well that Ukraine has agreed to a ceasefire unconditionally for the last several months, and it has been Russia that has not agreed to a ceasefire. That was President Trump's main objective today. And when we did hear from the president, he said, we didn't get there, but we think that we can. So a lot of questions remaining for the president, Trump, not just about what was discussed in that room and what might be happening now, but also how that all happened back there. It was just very unusual, atypical, and I think we're all awaiting, the readout, because the way that it felt in the room was not good. It did not seem like things went well, and it seemed like Putin came in and steamrolled, got right into what he wanted to say, and got his photo next to the president and then left. Of course, that is only the piece of the picture that we have right now, and certainly President Trump, who is the host and who is the president, would not want to, I think, enable something that would make him look weak. But we are eagerly awaiting to hear the background on that. And I will also note that we didn't see any sort of scowls on the faces of the likes of Steve Witkoff or Secretary Rubio or any of the other members of the U.S. delegation. And I think had it been concerning, we might have seen something there. But just to paint a picture for you of in the room, how it felt, what we're wondering about, what we need to know to put the pieces together and fully understand what we all just witnessed.
Yeah,
Right.
I guess you have great sources, and so does a lot of people, and we'll try to put this thing together. The other thing is, it's really not between the U.S. and Russia, as you know, Jackie. It's between the U.S., it's between Ukraine and Russia. We're almost listening to say, is there a chance, is there a path to a ceasefire? And if not, the president's going to make evaluations from there, because he said
definitely more
serious
likely
sanctions coming
now.
After and the arms are going to
What
continue
the
to flow.
fuck?
And So therefore, if Vladimir Putin thinks he's steamrolled or thinks he's got a victory, if a victory is us with more sanctions and more arms, that doesn't look like a victory to me.
No, it certainly would not be. And the president has noted rightfully that the tariffs that he threatened on secondary sanctions on big purchasers of Russian oil like India and China that really drove Putin to the negotiating table, that would drive Russia's economy from bad to worse. And the picture really inside of Russia is very bad. They are having to give sign-up bonuses to join the military that are larger than the average national.
I'm just saying.
The average salary for across the country. They're running out of people. They're running out of cash. No one will buy their debt. There are any number of data points that you could reference here. And so certainly the president holds all the cards. But there were some things that Putin said that are always cause for concern. When he references things like root causes,
I know.
It's always a reference back to his ultimate goal of taking all of Ukraine. And so we'll see, though, of course. We got more out of Putin than we did from President Trump. And I expect that we'll get the full picture when he talks to Sean Hannity. Very, very grateful that he is going to be giving the full readout here soon.
Jackie, you're about to get a flow of information, so I'm going to let you gather that. So I appreciate it. Meanwhile, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo joins us now. Last time they met, he was there. Mr. Secretary, your thoughts about how little we know at this point?
Yeah, Brian, that was different for sure. Different than most of the pressers that President Trump has, where he's usually very straightforward and very forward-leaning and sharing all the things that he can. Clearly, he felt in this instance to deliver on behalf of America, the best thing to do was to be quiet. I don't think we should overread that. I would also urge everyone watching. I'm sure the Russians are already out with a series of statements. They'll come out with more. Pay little attention to what they actually say. What we ought to all focus on is what they do in the coming hours. Will there be missiles flying tonight in Ukraine? Will the Russians continue their advance? What will the Ukrainians do on the ground? I'm sure President Zelensky will get the briefing from President Trump on what actually took place. But will we see a de facto ceasefire, at least for a little while they try to, I want to make sure I get President Trump's words right, to try and iron out some of the things that still remain to be figured out. But I agree, pretty non-transparent, much that we don't know.
Right.
That does suggest there are significant roadblocks along the way that remain.
Mr. Secretary, I didn't go to key school. I couldn't get in. It was probably the Russian language that stopped me. But it looks as though they've been listening to the president. If in 2022 I met with President Biden, he essentially said, and I said it doesn't have to come to a war. We don't need these hostilities. But he didn't seem to care, so we had a war. So blame President Biden for that. And he also went on to say there wouldn't have been a war if President Trump had been president. That's exactly what President Trump feels. Also, they went out of their way, even before the summit, to establish in the past how America worked together in World War II, putting roses on your monument, symbolizing the U.S.'s role in defeating Nazi Germany. He also went out of his way to talk about this has been the lowest point in the Cold War, but we have so much in common. Look, we're neighbors. You want to read into that a little bit?
Only this, Brian. Putin gets the joke, right? He is trying diligently to snuggle up to President Trump. He knows that President Trump holds all the cards that can bring his nation to near ruin. That, by the way, that read of World War II, I've heard from.
He glazed Trump
so many times it's laughable.
and attacked Biden. Who gives a fuck? Trump is giving him everything.
Good actors in the aftermath of World War II, to say the least. The Soviet Union destroyed so much and did so little for its own people. He also defended the Christian church. I mean, it's really quite laughable as well. But he had all the notes he thought would matter. I think that is a misread in some ways. President Trump, while he said we have a great relationship, has been incredibly tough with respect to Russia, far more capable of deterring Vladimir Putin than Joe Biden or Barack Obama.
America's fall as the international superpower, the hegemonic superpower, is not even going to be like a graceful exit.
I just want to bring it to the one point. You know that you had a long
it's just happening at an alarming rate that I previously could not have fathomed, could not have imagined.
Said this of significance.
And it's like Trump is just truly accelerating it. He really is the great nation builder for China, and I guess for Russia as well.
Just a very few that are left. Some are not that significant. One is probably the most significant, but we have a very good chance of getting there. We didn't get there, but we have a very good chance of getting there.
So, you know President Trump. You know his body language. What are your thoughts about what he means?
I think there's still significant sticking points along the way. They may have identified interests that they can work their way through, perhaps on economic matters and the like, but it sounds to me like sort of the central issue, the thing that we've all been talking about for the days leading up to this, Vladimir Putin's willingness to conduct a ceasefire with no conditions so that they can get to the table and discuss a formal resolution of the conflict. It doesn't sound like Putin showed up today ready to concede that core point.
Yeah, we didn't get there, is what he said, but we have productive meetings. I'm going to call NATO. I'm going to call the EU, European leaders. I'm going to call Zelensky. So he does have something to say, right? And soon we're going to get that, what happened and what didn't happen.
Oh, yeah, he has something
and then
to
we're going to
say.
have evaluation. It's just very different not to get that from the press conference.
Yeah, in a matter
Bro,
of
they're
hours,
having such
we'll
a hard
have
time
figured out
spinning.
really where
They can't even spin it because it was so devoid of nothing. And it's like one of the worst possible outcomes because then all you've done at that point is just like show good favor to Vladimir Putin. And that's it. And you got nothing in return for it other than Vladimir Putin saying Biden was responsible, and also I would have never invaded Ukraine if Trump was still president. That's it. That's what Trump got in exchange for bringing Vladimir Putin to America under the auspices of like a ceasefire negotiation that literally, by his own admission, did not come to a reasonable conclusion at all.
There should be another meeting. I was kind of interested to get your take when Putin recommended a venue. Watch.
Mr. President, I'd like to thank you very much, and we'll speak to you very soon and probably see you again very soon. Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I could see it possibly happening. Thank you very much, Vladimir. And thank you all. Thank you.
I think that caught him by surprise. Your thoughts?
Yeah, probably so. I'm sure President Putin would like to show up with the remaining fighters that he can still fly, and the Russian bombers, just as the Americans flew over the meeting today. Putin would probably like to return that favor and have a home and away game. I think President Trump will be pretty smart about where the venue for the next meeting. And I think it'll be important that President Zelensky be at that meeting as well. I'd be very surprised if President Zelensky, Trump, and Putin all met in Moscow. That would surprise me quite a bit.
And a lot of people are going to talk about this. Jackie Heinrich points out, in tradition would have it, usually the home team gets to speak first. Vladimir Putin spoke first.
Yeah,
but with the president's way of approaching everything about the presidency, I would not look at that
Zelensky. They bring Zelensky over and they kill him.
They just heat that.
Vladimir Putin gives Donald Trump the weapon to kill
President Trump, right?
Zelensky with. And he's like, come on, do it.
Diplomatic niceties are not something that's going to offend him. I think also he likely wanted the last word. I know when I was in meetings like this and there was a readout, I always wanted to be the last one to clean up anything the other person may have said that didn't ring true to me. I imagine President Trump wanted to keep that prerogative so that if President Putin said something that he found either incorrect or needed to be fixed, he'd get that last word. He certainly got that today.
Mr. Secretary, check your text messages in your email. Let us know when you get some detail, and we'll have you just bump right in. Thanks so much for being our expert.
Oh, yeah, because you wanted to get the last word.
Meanwhile, 22 minutes after the hour, let's bring in Fox News contributor Kellyanne Conway, Jason Chaffetz, as well as Fox and Friends weekend co-host Charlie Hurd. Kellyanne, I'll talk to you. Your sense about the fact that we did really not get any details from that press conference. Why?
Look, I think anybody's confused about how this went down is still wondering what happened at the end of that final Sopranos episode. This is exactly what President Trump said was going to happen. He said it's not his deal to make. Putin is killing innocent people in a sovereign nation. He invaded that nation, and the country that is being attacked so viciously needs to be at the table to make the final deal. The second thing the president promised and delivered upon, Brian, is that this meeting would set up the framework for the next meeting. And it is not always the case where one meeting leads to another. We've all seen President Trump be one and done. I think in addition to the art of the deal is the art of the details. And I know President Trump is going to get back on Air Force One tonight. He's not going to go to sleep at all the entire ride. We already know that. And he's going to expect everyone around him.
He's going to be kicking his feet up thinking about how Vladimir Putin fucked his ass.
And what the details should be like. And I think he's going to talk to Zelensky again. He's going to talk to the other European leaders again. Look, everything came up Trump in the U.S. today. This was his meeting on U.S. soil with U.S. bombers ahead. Look at the step and repeat behind them. It says pursuing peace. Do you think Vladimir Putin wanted to stand in front of a banner on U.S. soil a foot shorter than the U.S. president in front of words that say
my
proceed.
God, the goal.
That's the goal here. But that's President Trump's
Brother,
goal.
are you
And the
serious?
last thing I'll say is Putin, I disagree completely with who said he's got cards to play. He got the first word.
Bro, they're
the
libs
first
now.
statement. I think today
They're
the most
fucking
important
libs. They're libbed
word
up.
to get
They're
was
libbed
the
up the
last
wazoo.
word.
This
and
is
President
crazy.
Trump was crisp and concise. You know why? Putin treated him like they're friends. Oh, the religious artifacts. Oh, you're looking so healthy and vibrant. Donald Trump was not being his jovial, jaunty self in this press conference. It was not emotional. It was transactional. And I think it's because Putin knows Trump can crush Russia's economy with primary sanctions like he's done before and these secondary sanctions for countries like India and China who are buying Russian oil. I think it's a huge win for the president.
Yeah, when we get details, I'll know.
Okay, this deal, this fake deal that wasn't a deal at all is literally even worse than we previously thought. If this is the spin, the spin is,
I think that's actually a good
wow,
line.
Donald Trump made Vladimir Putin look short in comparison in front of a banner that says pursuing peace.
No kidding. I think it's a huge win for President Trump, for the United States. There is but one superpower in this world. It's the United States of America, both militarily and economically. You had the visuals on the military side, but both President Putin and President Trump talked about the economic strength. I also don't think this is all about Ukraine. I think they probably had a discussion that was much broader than that. I think this has to do with China. I think it has to do with Israel. I think it has to do with where Vladimir Putin...
You think they talked about all that?
I think they do mention that. I don't think they go 3 hours with maps. Well, because I think they actually go through and they want to talk about all of these places on where Russia is in the world. And we can push Russia around, because if Donald Trump decides to turn that knob and say, you're no longer going to be a participant in the world economy, then you're going to fall apart. That's why President Trump holds all the cards.
And that's why John Radcliffe going, don't you think, Jason?
Yes.
John Radcliffe going is important because he knows what's going on in Russia. He has the intelligence. So he says, listen, I know what he's telling you, Charlie Hurt. Radcliffe could say, but I'm going to tell you the reality, what's really happening in Russia, and the CIA knows.
Yeah, and I think the big reason we're all kind of reeling right here is because
we know nothing.
Yeah, well, we know nothing, but also we're so accustomed to Donald Trump taking all these questions. The president never misses an opportunity to take questions, and so we're sort of like confused by this. Right now, normally, under normal circumstances, we would be 1/8 of the way through a reeling press conference where he answers every single question.
It's amazing. Dude, they're trying desperately to spin this around into like a positive, and there's so nothing. There's so much of absolutely nothing, nada, zero, that they're just like, yeah, Trump looked hot on stage. Of Vladimir Putin, I bet he felt bad after he nutted in Trump, you know? Like, you're used to Trump dominating global leaders, right? You're used to him bitching them out, having them come to the White House, sitting there as he like chirps on endlessly about, I don't know, transgender athletes or something, right? This was Putin doing that to him. And you just saw it. Like, and for a guy who cares so much about the aesthetics of domination, compare Donald Trump's meetings with like Keir Starmer, Macron, Merz, and any number of different world leaders versus the meeting that he just had and the press conference that he just gave with Vladimir Putin. He was the one in the bitch seat. And this is something that he cares about. He cares about not looking like he's being dominated. It's maybe the only thing he cares about. So I don't know. I just feel like it's pretty crazy that he was like even smiling through the process when it's like very obvious that the deal didn't go anywhere.